During the recent sharp drop in Bitcoin triggered after the White House issued a new executive order or regulatory policy tightening control over the crypto sector, President Trump's son, Barron Trump, was reported to have made hundreds of millions of dollars by opening a short position just before the sell-off began. According to the Hindustan Times, a transaction worth approximately $200 million, allegedly linked to Barron Trump's company, appeared shortly before the U.S. announced its new trade tariff decision. Today I will show you that this is no coincidence. There is a pattern in history when empires fear losing control of their money, their leaders reach for the shadows. They manipulate rumors, distort markets, and turn information into a weapon more powerful than any army. Rome did it with gold. Britain did it with war bonds. And in America, the whispers now circle around a new kind of power, digital, volatile, and borderless. For decades, the United States ruled through the dollar. Its value shaped wars, alliances, and the fate of nations. But in the early 2020s, a new force emerged from the margins. Bitcoin, a currency no president could print, no treasury could freeze, no empire could fully command. And then came Donald Trump. According to the theory that spreads in hushed tones across financial forums and late-night political circles, Trump didn't just discover Bitcoin, he allegedly recognized its political utility long before the public did. Some claim he understood that every presidential statement, every regulatory hint, every policy leak could move the digital markets like clockwork. And if timed precisely, those movements could generate fortunes. What if key figures monitored those swings? What if the family watched Bitcoin's pulse rise and fall before each announcement? What if information, not ideology, became the most valuable asset inside the American dynasty? Picture the Oval Office at dusk. A single headline is prepared. A market waits. Billions tremble on the edge of a keystroke. At the center narrative lies a single unsettling thesis. When political power converges with financial volatility, the boundary between governance and speculation dissolves, and those who command information rule both realms. Bitcoin, unlike the dollar, is shaped not by institutions, but by perception. It reacts to signals, fear, optimism, uncertainty. A single sentence from a global leader can move billions. Donald Trump recognizes this truth earlier than most, that controlling the narrative around Bitcoin could become a new form of political leverage, one that bypasses traditional gatekeepers of power. The mechanism is simple yet devastating. When a president speaks, markets listen. When a president hints, markets tremble. When a president delays, markets speculate. The theory claims that every policy leak, every televised gesture, every ambiguous remark about regulation or national strategy could trigger a predictable reaction. Bitcoin, sensitive and exposed, becomes a mirror reflecting political intentions in real time. Yet the deeper question is psychological. Throughout history, leaders have sought instruments that amplify their reach beyond the ballot box or the battlefield. For emperors, it was land. For industrialists, it was oil. For Cold War presidents, it was nuclear deterrence. But for a modern populace navigating a fragmented nation, the most potent instrument is attention, and Bitcoin thrives on attention more than any currency before it. In this landscape, Trump sees the digital asset not as a threat to the dollar, but as a lever, a way to shift public focus, influence investor behavior, and cultivate a loyal financial constituency. Bitcoin's volatility becomes a political asset. Every surge a testament to influence, every crash a reminder of dependence. Economically, this narrative rests on a dark equation: information asymmetry plus market sensitivity, generational wealth for those who act before the crowd. Throughout history, from the Medici to the robber barons, those who mastered this equation shaped nations. And now the stage is set for a modern iteration of this timeless pattern. By the time the public recognizes the pattern, the coincidental timing of statements, the market's violent reactions, the growing presence of cryptocurrency in national debates, the theory has already taken root. It spreads through message boards, encrypted channels, and kitchen table conversations, not as fact but as fear, not as evidence but as inevitability. Because once a population believes its leaders can move markets with words, trust weakens, and when trust weakens, power shifts to whoever controls the shadows. History proves it again and again. Every cycle begins the same way: a dominant empire, a strained currency, and a population seeking alternatives. In this fictional narrative, the United States enters this phase quietly. The dollar remains powerful, but the trust beneath it begins to thin. Years of political division, rising debt, and global uncertainty create the perfect soil for a new monetary identity. Stage 1, monetary centralization, like Rome consolidating its mints. In the 3rd century, America reinforces its control over the financial system. Regulations tighten. Surveillance expands. Every transaction becomes data. In this environment, Bitcoin becomes more than an asset. It becomes an escape route. People don't adopt it for profit, but for autonomy. Stage 2, distrust. In official narratives, this stage mirrors Weimar Germany, where citizens slowly realized that the government could not protect the value of their money. In the fictional American storyline, public skepticism grows each time a new bill is printed, each time $1 trillion is approved without debate. Commentators argue, economists warn, but the deeper shift is emotional fear replaces faith. Stage 3, the rise of a parallel market. Argentina lived this stage for decades, a nation operating on 2 currencies, one official and one survivalist. In this fictional version of America, Bitcoin fills that role. It becomes the shadow currency of the restless, the disillusioned, the ambitious. And this is the moment when conspiracy theories begin whispering the same dangerous question: if the public trusts Bitcoin more than Washington, who truly controls the future? But the pattern has already begun. Historical cycles reveal a crucial truth. Once a parallel currency rises, political actors inevitably intervene. In this fictional landscape, Donald Trump emerges not as an observer, but as a participant, a figure who recognizes that controlling the narrative is more powerful than controlling the money itself. Stage 4, elite accumulation. Every empire's turning point begins with elites quietly acquiring what the masses don't yet understand. During Rome's crisis, generals hoarded gold. In Qing China, merchants stored silver. In this fictional account, wealthy insiders accumulate Bitcoin during periods of silence, long before the public recognizes the significance of every speech, tweet, or policy rumor. Stage 5, narrative control. This is where the theory deepens. Bitcoin does not respond to laws. It responds to signals. A phrase, a leak, a regulatory hint. Historically, empires sent coded messages through coinage, decrees, and symbols. In this imagined world, presidential statements function the same way, and each public remark, whether dismissive or supportive, allegedly becomes a spark for price swings. Stage 6, coordinated timing. The heart of the conspiracy. The pattern suggests that strategic timing becomes more valuable than policy itself. Before an announcement, accumulation. After the announcement, profit. The market reacts like a living organism, jumping at every signal. Critics call it coincidence. Believers call it orchestration. And the line between the two grows thinner with each news cycle. By the time they realized, it was too late. Every historical pattern ends the same way, not with an explosion, but with a quiet shift in power. In this fictional conspiracy narrative, the climax is subtle, almost invisible. Stage 7, public adoption and dependency. Once enough citizens use the parallel currency, the traditional system becomes vulnerable. Rome learned this when citizens stopped trusting imperial coins. The Soviet Union faced it when the black market ruble gained more credibility than official wages. In America, Bitcoin becomes the heartbeat of a new generation, a financial identity born outside Washington's control. Stage 8. The political leverage point. This is the final stage when the leader who controls the narrative around Bitcoin gains influence beyond traditional political limits, not through legislation, not through institutions, but through the ability to move markets with a sentence. In this fictional scenario, Trump becomes a symbolic figure, a politician who navigates between two currencies, two realities, two centers of power. The theory claims he doesn't just lead within the system, he leads between systems, and those who operate between systems have always shaped the fate of empires. Picture this: a divided nation, a volatile market, a leader whose words carry the weight of billions, a currency rising not through policy but through fear, ambition, and secrecy. History doesn't repeat, it evolves, and the next stage has started. The year is 2025, and the United States stands at a crossroads. The nation appears stable on the surface, yet beneath the calm lies a fractured financial landscape. Debt has crossed historic thresholds. Political factions operate like rival courts. Trust, the foundation of currency, becomes the rarest commodity in America's vaults. Against this backdrop, Bitcoin rises again, not as a fringe asset, but as a cultural symbol. Young investors adopt it as a rebellion. Corporations treat it as insurance. Foreign governments hold it as quiet leverage, and every market shift feels strangely synchronized with the political climate. In this situation, Donald Trump returns to power as a polarizing figure embodying both defiance and unpredictability. His statements about digital assets carry an electric charge. A single interview can ignite trading frenzies. A late-night social media post can erase billions or create fortunes. Analysts, unable to explain the timing, begin to ask forbidden questions. Online communities then map the coincidences. Charts overlay speeches. Patterns align with press leaks. And although no evidence is presented, the narrative grows that Bitcoin's volatility is not random, but reactive, that it dances to the rhythm of political power. The fictional theory spreads like wildfire, not because it is proven, but because the environment makes it believable. When institutions appear fragile and leaders appear omnipresent, the imagination fills the gaps, and the boundary between speculation and conspiracy dissolves. By the time they realized it was too late, in this imagined present, the United States becomes a battleground of two monetary ideologies: the centralized legacy of the dollar and the decentralized uprising of Bitcoin. Each system represents a different vision of the future order versus autonomy hierarchy versus algorithm tradition versus disruption. Global powers watch closely. China accelerates its digital yuan, hoping to weaken American dominance. Europe debates centralized digital currencies. Emerging nations accumulate Bitcoin, quietly treating it as geopolitical insurance. The world begins to shift not through armies or treaties, but through ledgers and code. Inside America, the fictional conspiracy deepens. Bitcoin mining facilities expand in swing states. Political donors accumulate digital reserves. Lobbyists push for ambiguous legislation, neither fully supportive nor restrictive, but perfectly positioned to maintain volatility. And volatility in this narrative is the lifeblood of influence. Trump embodies that volatility. His presence alone moves markets. His speeches act as catalysts. His unpredictability becomes a strategic asset. Supporters see him as a defender of financial freedom. Critics view him as a manipulator of digital chaos, but both sides agree on one thing: Bitcoin is no longer outside politics, it is politics. One question becomes the center of every discussion. If a president can move a decentralized currency, is it still decentralized? If a family can anticipate market swings, is it still a free market? If information becomes more valuable than law, what remains of the old system? In the imagined world of 2025, America walks a familiar path, one carved by empires before it. History doesn't repeat, it evolves, and the next stage has started. In every age, an empire reaches a moment when its greatest strength becomes its most fragile illusion. For the United States, that illusion is the belief that the dollar is unshakable, that political power is linear, that markets remain untouched by the shadows of ambition. But the story told here suggests a different ending. It imagines a world where influence no longer flows through institutions, but through signals, where markets rise not on policy, but on perception, and where a single leader can redirect billions with a sentence. In this imagined future, Donald Trump becomes less a politician and more a symbol, the embodiment of a new kind of power. Not military power, not legislative power, but informational power, the ability to move a decentralized system through centralized attention. It is a paradox worthy of an empire in transition, and as Bitcoin grows into a political force, the lines blur further. What was once a digital experiment becomes a pillar in the struggle for control. What was once a market becomes a battlefield. What was once a conspiracy becomes a narrative that millions believe, not because it is proven, but because it feels inevitable. Picture the final scene: an aging empire, a restless population, a digital currency rising from the margins, a leader whose voice can shift the balance with a whisper. Empires never fall in the moment of crisis. They fall when the currency of trust runs out. And in this prophecy, America approaches that moment one headline at a time.